Everything is tied to this debasement of currency. The S&P 500 is not going up. The dollar is going down. Once you see that, you cannot unsee it. That was Raoul Pal explaining the invisible force that is quietly destroying the value of your savings every single year. But what Pal did not explain, and what almost nobody in finance ever explains, is where that force begins. Not on a trading floor, not inside a central bank, not in a congressional budget meeting. It begins in one of the most surreal, beautiful, and terrifying places on Earth. A corridor of water barely 21 miles wide, squeezed between Iran and Oman, where 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through every single day. 20% of the entire world's supply. 1/5 of every drop of oil that keeps the global economy running. This is the Strait of Hormuz. Right now, both the United States and Iran have blockaded it from opposite sides. What happens next in this narrow passage of water will determine the price of oil, the direction of inflation, the Federal Reserve's next move, and potentially whether Bitcoin breaks to $80,000 or crashes to $60,000. But this video is not just about what is happening today. The Strait of Hormuz is not what the headlines have told you it is. It is not a dry military coordinate on a map. It is a place where mountains bleed red mineral runoff into the sea, where corals that should be dead have evolved to survive temperatures that kill every other reef on the planet, where people press the Earth's minerals into food, build ocean-going ships from memory alone, and speak a language that exists nowhere else on Earth. And every single one of those facts connects directly to your money in ways you have never considered. If you care about understanding the real forces that move markets, not just the headlines, subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is unlike anything you have seen on a finance channel before. Let me start with the number that controls the global economy. 21 million barrels every day, through shipping lanes barely 2 miles wide in each direction. Super carriers, the length of 4 city blocks, navigate a passage so narrow that the margin for error is measured in meters, not miles. A single vessel running aground, a single military confrontation, a single miscalculation by any of the dozens of naval forces currently patrolling these waters, and the flow stops. When the flow stops, the math is immediate and brutal. Oil surges. It went from $60 to over $105 in the first weeks of this war. Goldman Sachs revised its forecast up 20%. The International Energy Agency called it a supply shock without precedent in the modern oil market. And that was before Trump announced the naval blockade. When oil surges, inflation follows. Not slowly, violently. Higher gas prices at the pump within days. Higher shipping costs for every product on every shelf within weeks. Higher food prices within a month. And when inflation surges, the Federal Reserve cannot cut interest rates. When the Fed cannot cut rates, liquidity tightens. When liquidity tightens, risk assets fall. Your stocks, your retirement account, your crypto. One straight, 21 miles wide. And it runs the chain reaction that determines what everything in your portfolio is worth. But here is what makes this strait unlike any other choke point on the planet. It is not just a shipping lane. It is a place where the most intimate human relationship with the Earth coexists with the most abstract global financial dependency, and neither side acknowledges the other. Rising from the Persian Gulf approximately 5 miles off the coast of Iran sits Hormuz Island, 18 square miles of some of the most geologically dramatic terrain on Earth. Mountains layered in bands of iron oxide red, sulfuric yellow, salt white, and deep violet. 570 million years of compression and mineral transformation are exposed to a sun that allows no shadow to soften what the rock is revealing. And the people who live on this island do something with that geology that no financial model would ever predict. They eat it. The iron-rich clay, known locally as gallic, is incorporated into the local diet, mixed into a sauce called surak, pressed into flatbread, and traded as a seasoning across the southern coast. while directly below them, through the same waters, crude oil worth billions of dollars passes every hour. A community, pressing the Earth's minerals into food, and a global economy pressing the Earth's oil into currency, occupy the same narrow geography without ever quite acknowledging each other. That contradiction is not poetic, it is financial, because it reveals something that Raoul Pal has been saying for years and that most investors still do not understand. In his Substack essay titled, "This is How the World Works," Pal wrote that if the government and central bank need asset prices to rise faster than debt growth in order to stop the economic balance sheet implosion, then the only way to do that is to debase the currency, to lower the denominator, to give asset prices the illusion of rising. The people on Hormuz Island have no illusions about what the Earth provides. They take minerals from the ground and turn them into sustenance. Their relationship with the Earth is direct, physical, and honest. The global financial system that flows past their island every day operates on the opposite principle. It takes oil from the ground and turns it into an abstraction, dollars, derivatives, debt instruments. And then it prints more of those abstractions to cover the debts created by the previous abstractions. The island eats the Earth. The financial system eats itself. And the 21 miles of water between them is the thread that holds both systems together. Cut that thread, and both worlds feel it. The fisherman on Hormuz loses the shipping lane he navigates daily. The pension fund manager in New York loses the inflation assumptions his entire portfolio is built on. Same event, same water, completely different consequences, completely connected. If this is changing how you see the global economy, hit the like button right now and keep watching, because the biology of this strait tells a financial story that is even more powerful than the geology. In the waters surrounding Hormuz, coral reefs exist that should not be alive. Summer temperatures in the Persian Gulf regularly reach 96 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, corals everywhere else on the planet experience mass bleaching and death. But the reefs around the Strait of Hormuz have, over thousands of years, developed a heat tolerance that represents one of the most significant cases of adaptive evolution in modern marine biology. They carry encoded in their biology information about how living systems persist where persistence should be impossible. 700 fish species depend on these reefs. Entire coastal communities across the northern Gulf feed their families from the protein these reefs produce. And those reefs are now being threatened by the very traffic that makes this strait matter to global finance: oil contamination from tanker traffic, runoff from military activity, the slow poisoning of the biological infrastructure that feeds the people who live beside the financial infrastructure that feeds the world. And here is the financial insight that nobody in markets talks about. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a corridor for oil. It is a corridor for the entire architecture of modern monetary policy. When oil flows, inflation stays manageable. When inflation stays manageable, central banks can keep rates low. When rates stay low, governments can refinance their debt cheaply. When debt gets refinanced, the system continues. When the system continues, your stocks go up, your house price goes up, and the number in your retirement account gets bigger. Remove the oil, and the entire chain collapses backward. Inflation spikes, rates rise, debt becomes unserviceable. The money printer fires up. Your currency loses value. Your savings erode. Raoul Pal quantified this erosion precisely. On X, he wrote that while everyone is worried about 3.5% inflation, the real issue is the ongoing 8% per annum debasement of currency on top of inflation. Your hurdle rate to break even is around 12%, just to keep your purchasing power. 8% a year. That is the tax you pay for the system functioning normally with oil flowing through Hormuz. When the strait closes, as it effectively has right now, that 8% accelerates. The emergency oil reserve releases run dry. The war spending adds to the debt. The money printing required to manage that debt increases the debasement, and the 12% hurdle rate that Pal identified becomes 15, 18, maybe 20%. At that rate, almost no traditional asset keeps up. Your savings account earns 2% while losing 20%. Your bonds pay 4% while losing 20%. Even the S&P 500, historically averaging 12%, falls behind. And this is where Bitcoin enters the picture, not as a speculation, not as a reaction to a headline, but as a structural response to the exact vulnerability that the Strait of Hormuz exposes. Bitcoin has 21 million coins, fixed, immovable. No government can print more. No central bank can debase it. No war, no blockade, no geopolitical crisis can change the supply schedule coded into its protocol. In a world where a 21-mile wide passage of water can trigger a chain reaction that devalues every fiat currency on Earth, an asset with a mathematically fixed supply is not a luxury. It is an architectural necessity. And the parallel is almost too perfect to be coincidence. 21 miles, 21 million coins, the width of the world's most fragile energy corridor, and the total supply of the world's most resilient monetary asset. One can be blocked, disrupted, and weaponized by any government with a navy. The other cannot be blocked, disrupted, or weaponized by anyone, ever. Now let me show you what happens on the other side of the strait, because it tells the most important part of this story. On the Omani side, accessible only by sea, the village of Kumzar sits on cliffs above the water in a position of such extreme isolation that it developed something almost no other place on Earth possesses, a language that belongs to nowhere else. Kumzari is a spoken tongue constructed from fragments of Persian, Arabic, Portuguese, Hindi, and several other languages accumulated across centuries of contact with passing traders, sailors, and empires who moved through the strait without staying. It is a fossil record of the Gulf's entire commercial history, compressed into the daily speech of a few hundred people. Every empire that passed through left traces in the vocabulary of those who watched them go. This includes the Portuguese who occupied Hormuz in the 16th century, the British who controlled Gulf trade routes for 2 centuries, and the Americans who built naval bases after the discovery of oil. Every power came for the same reason, control of the passage, and every power left something behind in the language of the people who remained. That is exactly what happens with currencies. Every empire that has ever controlled global trade has issued a reserve currency. The Portuguese real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound, the American dollar. Each one rose with the empire that controlled the trade routes. Each one fell when that control weakened. And each transition left behind a population holding a currency that was worth less than it was the day before. Ray Dalio documented this in his book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. He studied the rise and fall of every major empire over 500 years and found the same pattern repeating every time. Economic expansion, rising debt, money printing, currency debasement, loss of reserve currency status. The average lifespan of a reserve currency is roughly 80 to 100 years. The dollar has held that status since 1944. You can do the math. The people of Kumzar have watched empires come and go through their strait for centuries. Their language is the proof. And the financial lesson embedded in that language is the same lesson Raoul Pal teaches with spreadsheets and charts. Nothing that depends on a single choke point lasts forever. Not an empire, not a currency, not a financial system built on the assumption that 21 miles of water will always remain open. Along Hormuz's coast, men build ocean-going wooden vessels, called lenge, using a method that has no written form. The curves of the hull, the angle of the keel, the placement of each structural member is held not in blueprints, but in hands that have felt the wood enough times to know what it will do under stress. UNESCO recognizes this as intangible cultural heritage. The Portuguese documented the same construction method in the 16th century. It has not changed because it did not need to change. It works. In the wind tower villages of Quixum, buildings cool their interiors by 15 to 20 degrees without electricity, without machinery, and without maintenance. Towers over 1,000 years old channel cooler air from roof level downward through internal baffles. This is not primitive technology awaiting improvement. It is perfected technology, evolved through centuries of iteration by people for whom failure meant death by heat. And in every village, water is managed with a discipline that makes modern resource management look reckless. On Hormuz, 366 ancient wells were each used only once per year in rotation, preserving freshwater reserves in an environment that generates almost none of its own. Annual rotation, zero waste, no technology required. Just the accumulated intelligence of generations who understood that survival depends on never taking more than the system can regenerate. There is a financial principle in those wells that every investor should tattoo on their forearm. These communities survived for centuries in one of the harshest environments on Earth by understanding that the resources they depended on were finite and had to be managed with absolute discipline. They did not overspend. They did not borrow from next year's water supply to cover this year's thirst. They did not assume that because the well worked today, it would work tomorrow. The modern financial system operates on the opposite assumption. It borrows from the future constantly. $36 trillion in US debt, 400% of global gross domestic product in total world debt, $9 trillion in refinancing due this year alone. The wells of Hormuz were designed to last forever because the people who built them understood scarcity. The global debt system is designed to collapse because the people who built it pretend scarcity does not exist until a 21-mile strait closes and reminds everyone, violently, that it does. As the world moves into a future defined less by stability than by pressure, by heat, by resource scarcity, by the collapse of certainties that were always more fragile than they appeared, the Strait of Hormuz begins to feel not like an edge case, but like a preview, a place where the conditions that the rest of the world is only beginning to confront have been the ordinary terms of existence for centuries. The corals that evolved to survive impossible heat, the wells designed to preserve water across generations, the ships built from memory rather than manuals, the language assembled from the ruins of passing empires. Each one is a lesson in what survival actually requires. Not confidence in the system, but the discipline to function when the system fails. Bitcoin was built on the same principle, a monetary system that does not require trust in any government, any central bank, or any 21-mile-wide shipping lane. A system designed from day one to survive exactly the kind of shock that the Strait of Hormuz is delivering to the global economy right now. The people of Hormuz did not wait for the crisis to begin learning how to endure it. The question this place leaves open, quietly, without instruction, is whether the rest of us are paying attention. If this changed how you see the Strait of Hormuz, money, and Bitcoin, subscribe, hit the like button, and tell us in the comments. Did you know any of this about Hormuz before watching? We read every comment. We will see you in the next one.